Good morning, Dog Nation, and Mary. 2 days after Christmas now? My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're happy that you're here. Welcome to my humble home here. We're going to do things a little bit differently today, but in a way that I think you're going to really like. In honor of the fact that we're kind of coming out of that sort of Christmas slumber a little bit, and now we are kind of in what you might think of as sort of game week inside of a week before Georgia gets ready to take on Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. We're going to set the stage for the next few days today, I think, in a really wonderful way. We're going to do something like we did back in the summer. Do you remember when we did our DawgNation roundtable back in the summer? That was pre-recorded at the time. This is totally live. I could hold up a copy of the newspaper to prove that if you wanted me to. But today's totally live. But we're going to bring in a moment Connor and Jeff and Mike, some of the folks you read at DawgNation.com on a regular basis. We're going to preview a lot of the hot topics around the upcoming Sugar Bowl, some of the stuff that's still out there from the transfer portal, rumors and reports and things along, that nature. So we're going to do all of that with you over the course of the next few minutes, what I think is going to be a really fun show here today. So I'm happy to be where I am. Looking forward to being in Athens later on today. We'll tell you more about that coming up. Happy to have all of you here too. And we'll just get ready to roll through and have a great time. By the way, we got a Gunnar Stockton, or a reasonable facsimile thereof, in our Dog Nation comment section. He says, "Go Dogs." You love that. Randy Hall on the subject of Thomas Brown kind of managing the situation there in Chicago. The Bears are a little bit of a mess. I think some of us were pretty skeptical of Caleb Williams before he began his NFL career. That seems like a reasonable concern now. Thomas Brown, I think, has a bright future in football, but perhaps a task that no one was going to be able to succeed with when it comes to being the Bears interim coach. Kind of a rough one there. And obviously we've watched some, pretty bad football, it seems like, as of late. So that is the situation there. DT also mentioning Thomas Brown's performance last night. So a lot of folks were watching the NFL. I will say that I was not watching NFL football last night. We were kind of here hanging out on this very floor behind me. We're playing Monopoly. We're doing stuff like that, trying to enjoy our time with family. So we didn't quite get into a lot of NFL football here last night. Let's see what else is going on. A lot of folks checking here. Good to see Shane Holiday checking in. You love that. Merry Christmas to him, of course. Randy Hall says, "It's my first Christmas, my new summer home." He says, "Sorry, no, BA's summer home is Utopia of the Seas." If that could be true, Randy boy, I certainly would be happy about that. But we have had a wonderful Christmas. It's been nice to be home here a little bit. Yesterday was one of those great days where really just didn't go anywhere. It's almost like if you're lucky enough to be off the day after Christmas, not everybody is, but if you're lucky enough to be off the day after Christmas, you really have almost like some of the best stuff of the whole season, because by that point in time, the gifts are open, everybody sort of, had their thing there, Santa Claus has been. And so now you're just sort of chilled out, and sometimes you're sort of eating the leftovers, which in many ways can be some of the best stuff. And you just kind of have that relaxed sort of do nothing day. We had that day yesterday around here, and it was really awesome, watching some movies and some, just some of that kind of stuff, really just sort of extending the Christmas. I mean, for us, Christmas is definitely not going to end until I leave from leave for New Orleans. We're going to be in full-on Christmas, mode until all that happens. Low Country Dog says Notre Dame fans are delusional. He says as delusional as I was on Christmas, thinking his wife was going to get him, whatever. And I didn't see the end of the comment there. I mean, there's clearly a lot of confidence around the Notre Dame fans right now, and a lot of confidence, I would say, around sort of people outside the boundaries of Dog Nation who perhaps think this is a different kind of Notre Dame team. This is a different kind of Georgia team. And we ourselves have said, and in fact, the last time we did a live show prior to today on Monday, we ourselves said, hey, the big question for me going into this playoff is things have clearly changed some in college football, but how much have they changed? Because previously, we've run through these numbers a million times, when you look at what Georgia has done against ranked non-conference opponents in sort of this era of Kirby Smart, not only does Georgia win those games, far more often than not, they blow their opponent out. So college football, the way that it has been, suggests an easy Georgia win. But the playing field across the sport in many ways seems to have been more leveled, and Georgia perhaps doesn't quite have that same talent edge it has had before. Perhaps that's also the case. So, I will tell you that, I am expecting next week's game to be close. I think the point spread people who are expecting it to be a close game, I think in many ways they perhaps have that right. Maybe that is the case. We were incredibly confident about Georgia getting a blowout win against Clemson to begin the season, but I would say that a lot has changed since then. And, the likelihood of Georgia blowing out a quality team, I've told you many times, I'm not quite so sure, how likely that is right now. The likelihood that Georgia can still find a way to win this game, I clearly believe that's a possibility, no matter who's starting at quarterback for UGA, Gunnar Stockton, Carson Beck, anybody else. That Georgia's going to have plenty of chances to win this game, but I don't expect the game to be easy. I've certainly said that. Andrew Hughes says that Georgia's going to beat Notre Dame so badly that Notre Dame finally joins the conference. Wouldn't that be a miracle if that's indeed the case? So a lot of comments rolling in here today. Miriam Corbin checking in. Miriam, hope you got a great Christmas. We're glad to see you in here today. Phil Rogers predicts that Dawg's going to show up in New Orleans and beat Notre Dame. You love all of that. UG Marine says he's 100% sick of hearing the Dogs have got no shot. Yeah, I certainly don't know that anybody would be wise to say that for sure. Will Dickerson checks in, as he so frequently does, to say it's time to be alpha dogs in Trenton, Georgia. I love that from Will, always. There's also chat on here about Roderick Robinson. You perhaps have heard the reports about that. When we start our roundtable here in a moment, that's one of the topics we will get into, the myriad of published reports that now suggest that Roderick Robinson, who's battled injury to get back to Georgia for the end of the season, may now be, done once again, this time an ankle injury. Certainly that's very bad news. And I think one of the things that Georgia fans have been excited about going into the playoffs is the fact that the Georgia running back room has probably appeared to be healthier than it's been all year. And obviously the setback here for Rod Robinson would seem to change some of that. And Brian Roche checking in with just share some disappointment about that. Johnny Servdog there as well. So, yeah, so that's one of the hot topics. If you've been, like me, kind of in the Christmas world the last 24, 40 hours or so, that's maybe one of those things that you're just now getting caught up on, is that Robinson does have another injury setback. You hate it for him personally. You know how hard he's working. This is a different type of thing than he's dealt with before. It's also a little bit of a disappointment for Georgia on the field because, as I said before, getting healthier at running back, one of those things that you're trying to do. And yet at the same time, if you want to put a silver lining around it, this is also a guy that really has not been healthy and contributing to Georgia this season. So the version of Georgia that we see in the Sugar Bowl certainly won't be reduced because of the absence of Roderick Robinson. He really hasn't been playing up at this point in time anyway. So it would have been additive to have him, and now not having him essentially means you're looking at the same version of Georgia you've seen for most of this year, with perhaps the improved health of Trevor Etienne, who's obviously going to be a very big part of the offense if he's rock and roll ready to go. And you certainly think it seems like he's probably going to be. So we're going to do that. We're going to deal with some of the portal rumors, those getting away from Georgia, those who might still be coming, and what in the world's going on with Carson Beck. In fact, it's 10 a.m. across all platforms here. Let me give you a little bit more of an idea of what's coming up on today's show. And as always, of course, we're glad to have you with us. Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. A little different version for us. We are still kind of coming out of our Christmas slumber here a little bit. I am at home today, but we think we're going to use this as an opportunity to turn this into, I think, a really special show. And our reason for doing all of this is we're kind of rolling into, it's essentially game week now. We are inside of a week prior to Georgia taking on Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff in New Orleans. So as a way of kind of kicking off the previews, the preparation for that. Georgia back on the practice field today. They've been, I think, doing that yesterday too, kind of getting back to this on the other side of Christmas. We thought we'd set the stage for this by doing something on this show we've done in the past. We sort of do this for special occasions. We call it our DawgNation Roundtable. In the past, we've done this. It's been pre-recorded. This today being recorded live. So in a moment, we fire the thing up. It's going to be Jeff Sentell, as always, on a Friday. Connor Riley, good enough to join us. Mike Griffith going to join us for a few minutes too. He's got to step away after that. But we're going to have kind of an old school DawgNation Roundtable coming on here, debating and discussing hot topics related to the Sugar Bowl, Georgia's preparation for Notre Dame, the reports here of a pretty, disappointing injury setback for a Georgia player that UGA fans were optimistic about for the college football playoff, and what is going on in the transfer portal with guys not coming, guys who might still be coming. There's that weird thing out there as it relates to Carson Beck. We're going to cover all of that over the course of the next few minutes. So this is going to be, for you this morning, a perfect show if you've been doing Christmas with your kids, if you've been, imbibing on the eggnog, if you've been, knee deep in Hallmark movies or whatever else. If you're ready to get back to football, this show is going to be your entry point back into a college football conversation as we get ready for the Sugar Bowl. Of course, all of that was still with a little bit of a Christmas vibe going on with it there as well. So we're all over all of that over the course of the next few minutes, and we are glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans.
I trust you all had a great Christmas. We are so happy to get a little bit of feedback here right now. I don't know where that's coming from. Yeah, there you go. Glad to have all of you with us. Hope you had a wonderful time over the Christmas break. I trust that you're also getting ready to go here for a big prep here for the Sugar Bowl here too. We are looking forward to all of that. We're glad to have you with us here this morning. Kind of a fun thing for us here today, where we're going to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about some of the hot rumors that are out there for Georgia, what's going to go down with Notre Dame coming up next week in New Orleans as kind of the official prep for all of that gets going. We're going to cover all of that ground and more right now. What we're going to call kind of our DawgNation Daily Roundtable. We've done this in the past, wanted to do this here today because there's so much going on. So many people have been kind of in that sort of like Christmas mood, and they're kind of ready to kind of get back to the football mood again. So we're going to do our part to sort of cover all of that here today. And to help me do that, we're going to bring on three great guests at the same time. It's going to be sort of a free-for-all where we just sort of kind of break our traditional protocol and format and just sort of throw all the topics out there and get into all of this as much as we can. So let me say hello to Jeff Sentell, Mike Griffith, Connor Riley. Glad to have all of you with us here today. I see Mike, I see Jeff. Jeff, I guess let me start with you here. Good Christmas for you and the family. Everybody enjoying that and feeling good, and hope that Santa Claus was there and delivering plenty of great gifts to you and your family.
Yeah, man, this was a strong one for Santa Claus. We always talk about, is this a good season for Kirby Smart? Is this one of his best ones? I thought Santa came strong. He came really hard in the paint this year for kids of all ages.
That's good to hear. And Mike, I hope you had a great Christmas there as well.
You bet. We're staying busy, BA, ready for some more football.
Excited about that. We've also got Connor Riley checking in this morning, too. Great to have Connor here. Connor, I'll ask you the same question I asked everybody else before we get into the hot topics of the day. Nice Christmas. You get treated well? Did you treat others well? Did it work out for you the way that you'd like for it to?
It was a tough Christmas. I was at my wife's holiday party on Christmas Eve, and there was a terrorist takeover. A lot of explosions. Some people died. But we all got out. Well, not all of us. Rest in peace, Ellis, and I guess Joseph Takai. But we made it out of there, and we're here talking about Georgia football.
Well, that's good to know. I'm glad that Nakatomi Plaza will be safe again for another holiday for many years to come. And as Connor said, there is plenty to talk about. Before we get into the stuff with the Sugar Bowl and everything going down there, I think there's also a lot of kind of leftover portal stuff and frankly some unresolved portal stuff that's still out there. So I guess in no particular order, let's talk about some of these things before we get into everything else. And perhaps the biggest piece of news that sort of has a tangible tie-in back to Georgia is the fact that Dane Key, who Georgia seemed to have targeted in the portal for quite some time, and it kind of appeared to be the sort of main portal target for Georgia, sort of took the visit to Nebraska after UGA, and that ended up being the school that he chose here. So a productive receiver for an otherwise, not very good Kentucky offense, now going back with his, former position coach there at Nebraska. So I guess, Connor, let me start with you on this. A lot of Georgia fans going to be disappointed that probably the biggest name that we sort of had a, relatively sizable connection for Georgia with when it comes to Key now going to Nebraska. What did you make of that news to sort of start us off here today?
Yeah, I think the longer this recruitment went, the less good it was for Georgia. And he has some ties to Nebraska. His former wide receivers coach at Kentucky is now the wide receivers coach there. at Nebraska. You look at what this Georgia team needs. They need an X receiver, a big-bodied guy on the outside. Dan Key figured to have fit that role, and it's a credit to Nebraska that they were able to go out and land him. I think it's important to note here that around the same time that Key picked Nebraska, the NCAA came out with their decision that they were no longer going to count JUCO years as eligibility in the wake of the Diego Pavia ruling from a federal court. And so what that does potentially do is open the door for Colby Young to have an additional year at Georgia. But he's got to get his legal situation figured out, and that's not going to be done until at least February. And so I know that there are some people falling back on the idea that, hey, they've got Colby Young, Dan Key wasn't as big of a need. No, Georgia needs a guy like Dane Key, a guy that's played SEC football and could have come in and helped and especially bolstered a wide receiver room that, yes, they're bringing in more talent, Taylor, CJ Wiley, a lot of young prospects you like in that room. But they need guys that are going to be able to come in and produce next year. And so not getting Dane Key, I think that puts a further onus, in my opinion, on going out and landing Zachariah and Zion Branch. And I don't know how you feel about this, BA, but until we see Georgia land a portal caliber player of Zachariah Branch, I'm just going to be skeptical that they're going to be able to go out there and actually go out and do it. So this is a big miss, in my opinion, for Georgia in the transfer portal, seeing Dane Key end up at Nebraska.
Yeah, Jeff, and I'll come to you next because I know these are, certainly in the case of Zachariah Branch, a former recruit that you would have had some familiarity with just because of how explosive that he was. But I sort of agree with Connor on this to a degree, which is, I think, to have both branches. Definitely Zachariah Branch. That's the one that I know the best. Zion Branch seems like there may be something to like about him too, so you'd probably be happy to have both. But just given the fact that so many of these sort of portal-style stories seem to go the same way for Georgia, I don't have some huge level of optimism that Georgia's going to suddenly land the branches as a way of sort of changing the narrative around all of this. I don't mean that to be overly negative because the honest truth is I'm a lot more worried about the game Georgia's about to play than I am the roster that's putting together for 2025. But nonetheless, on this topic, like how much optimism do you think that Georgia should have about Zachariah and Zion Branch?
Yeah, Brendan, I think that's the kind of the key issue. I'm going to try to sound a little bit like Mike. I'm going to be brutally honest and kind of pull no punches. The Branch brothers, I think, are better prospects for Georgia than Dane Key. Everybody's going to point to Key only had 2 touchdowns last year or this past year. But, before that, he had decent production, Brendan. But I would say the Key's not the type of player that is any higher echelon player than Dominic Lovett was, Ra Thomas was, or Colby Young, because those guys were coming off, 5-6 touchdown catch seasons, major starters. I mean, I believe it was a playing time issue that Nebraska was able to promise. I also believe that there was a significant inducement as well as there to promise. That's kind of a good 4-1-1 there on Dane Key and what Georgia lost there. I think more of it's kind of fan fatigue, Brandon, that I think as it stands right now, Georgia is the only team in the SEC that hasn't brought in a portal guy in this kind of portal window. But I think that could all change with Zachariah Branch because, man, he's different. I mean, he was an All-American among All-Americans. I've seen these guys for 15 years now. You put the best players in the country on a field, and Zachariah Branch is going to do things that stand out. He is just that talented a guy. People will talk about what could he be at Georgia. I think he could be, at minimum, a guy that produces like a McCole Hardman, produces like an Isaiah McKenzie. And I think the 2-for-1 thing, everybody laughs in the recruiting world about package deals, but here's what's intriguing. Not only is it him, it's his brother, both of the Branch brothers. Zion would also have a chance to likely start in a depleted safety room at Georgia, considering Malachi Starks, Dan Jackson, their fates left with the team. And not only that, but I'm of the belief that USC has already kind of handsomely compensated at least Zachariah over the last few years. And now what the Branch brothers are looking for is they're looking for NFL development. They're looking for playing on the biggest stage. They're not seeking the biggest NIL dollars. So I think all those things kind of line up a little bit for Georgia here.
What do you think about all this, Mike?
Well, you guys covered a lot of ground between Connor and Jeff's contributions in your intro to this. Bottom line is Georgia needs an X, right? Whoever that is, and are they good enough? I think that we've stretched out the Georgia way as far as it can go. I think next year's schedule, even though these games are at home, it's going to be very difficult to beat these teams in Sanford Stadium. And I think the times of doing more with less are running out. There's a lot more parity in the SEC. I think the portal is more important than it's ever been. I think retention is challenging in a place like Georgia where you already developed some of these guys, and you don't want to lose the next man up. We saw that against Alabama. We saw that with A.D. Mitchell going to Texas. To me, that was the difference between Texas getting to the playoff and Georgia not getting to the playoff and perhaps winning a third national title. You weren't able to hold on to your ex, right? And you saw those two Alabama guys that were Georgia guys before, force recover a fumble, Burton score a touchdown. Retaining Georgia developed guys is harder than ever because there's an added value and an extra value for guys that, one, Kirby Smart identified, and two, had a year or 2 or even 3 years of development in the Georgia program. I dare say some of these receivers that transferred away, it could have been difference makers this year. I don't know to the extent that you beat Ole Miss or you beat Alabama, but fact of the matter is retaining your best players now is a tougher job. So I think you start there with the retention. And so far, I haven't seen any difference makers leave the program, and in my opinion. Now, there's some good prospects and guys that I think would have grown into some roles maybe, but there hasn't been any make or break guys. I haven't seen A.D. Mitchell walk out the door. Again, I point to that because that was a backbreaker. It really cost Georgia, I think, another national title. It cost Carson Beck. You don't want to lose one of those type of guys. You still have some decisions being made by guys. Is Trevor Etienne coming back for another year? What is Carson Beck's future? Is it with Georgia? Is it with someone else? Is it in the NFL? There's some guys on defense. Do they need another year? Dalen Everett, great example. To me, needs another year. Right now, maybe late second-day pick. Comes back another year, maybe first rounder. So Kirby's got a lot of things going on at once, in addition to hosting some of these prospects that are considering Georgia out of the portal. Bottom line is, if a kid doesn't realize the value of Georgia over the current mighty dollar, even Travis Hunter, when he was doing his interview, says NIL is for today, NFL is for the rest of your life. If the kid doesn't recognize that, probably not going to work out eventually in the Georgia system anyway. Those guys are few and far between, but you got to be careful with who you bring in. You bring the wrong guy in, he may never see the field, or he may see the field for a little while and, off-field issues or whatever. So there's a lot more to it than just landing the biggest names or the highest-ranked guys out of the portal. You got to protect the integrity of the program, the development, and yet still, at the end of this conversation, I'll echo what Jeff and Connor both said, Georgia needs an X. They got to find that guy between now and next season.
So Mike, let me ask you a follow-up to that, because obviously next year I'm going to want Georgia to have a full roster. I'm going to want it to have wide receivers. I'm going to want it to be competitive. There's a time coming for me to be really interested in what the 2025 team is going to look like. I don't know how worked up I can get about all this right now. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Georgia fans who are obviously very emotionally invested in this. But as Jeff mentioned, to me, Dane Key, a little bit different body type, but kind of performance-wise, sort of compares to a little bit like Dominic Lovett. It's just one of those things of, I'm more worried about the game that Georgia's about to play than I am what Dane Key is going to do. Because to be honest with you, until a few months ago, I don't know that I'd ever heard of Dane Key. And I'd like to have Zachariah Branch too. When I've watched Branch on TV, he's really, really electric. But I'd still rather beat Notre Dame than get Zachariah Branch. I just find myself more interested in the game that Georgia's about to play with the players that it currently has than I am whatever's coming next in the portal, even though that's obviously important. And Mike, if the trade-off here is, okay, well, Georgia's not really bringing anybody in, but it also isn't really currently losing a lot of high, value players too. There's not a lot of, portal drama with Georgia. For me as a fan right now, that's a trade I'm sort of okay with making. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's fair, but, again, and we're shooting for perfection here, right? What does Kirby say? Not practicing to win one game, practicing to win all of them. Everybody wants Georgia to win everything every year, every game, every way, every statistic, every ranking. It's not realistic. You're seeing more parity in college football, and there are going to be a faction of people that are interested in the free agency period, just like there's, Jeff's got, his, rock star following that love to read everything that he does on recruiting, and, Connor with every practice report and tackle and block. There's so many fragments of the Georgia audience because it was the most watched program in the nation last year, and by a wide margin. They averaged 8.5 million viewers per game. Average that. Travis Hunter never had more than 7.5 million for one game. So this program is so elevated. There's going to be so many factions, so many questions. We all want to touch all the bases. But the reality of it is, just like Kirby Smart, he can't do it all at once. And I do think, to your point, Brandon, the focus is on winning this game. I mean, Georgia has got a third national title in their grasp. To me, the dynasty has been maintained just by Georgia making the playoff, right? From here on out, in my opinion, it's icing on the cake. And I know a lot of fans don't agree with that. They want Georgia to win it all. They know that it's, 3 more wins over at least 2 winnable games for sure. We don't know who that third team is that they might see in Atlanta in January 19th, 20th, 21st, whatever day that game is. But bottom line is, I agree with you. I think most people are focused on the Notre Dame game, and yet at the same time, we've got this uncharted territory of a free agent window that we're all still negotiating and learning to negotiate, because it changes every year. We can't get used to anything. They change the dates of it. And now, when is the portal, and how many extra days do the playoff teams get, and when is it again in the spring? I mean, there's just so much going on with college football. I know it can be frustrating, and but I'm like you, right? I'm focused on Notre Dame. I want to see how Georgia arrives in New Orleans. I want to see who gets off that plane, who's healthy, who's not, and I want to see Kirby behind the microphone and hear this year's motto, this year's saying. How are they going to do it now? Now that they've navigated this hellacious schedule that the SEC gave them, how do they handle the one step of Notre Dame and likely Penn State? I don't know. I think Jeff's on that Boise State train. And then whoever we think emerges from that cage match on the other side of the bracket.
Jeff, what do you think? Jeff, you're muted.
Hey, man, I had to keep the dog down there. We got the dog park. This is great. We have all this collective experience here. Everybody's lamenting about this portal guy. Guys, is there anybody you would say next year is head and shoulders above Georgia in the conference because of what they did? I don't think so. I think everybody's still trying to catch Georgia. And I think Mike makes the point that, man, if Georgia seals the deal here in this postseason, that's 3 out of 4. I mean, at some point, are you allowed to be the second or third best team in the conference going into a season?
No, I think that's a fair point. I mean, obviously, look, there's a lot still going well for Georgia, even if this doesn't quite work out. We're going to lose Mike in a couple of minutes. He's got to step away. So I want to hit one more topic before we get there. It's also related to the transfer portal. And Connor, I'm going to come back to you for this. What do you make of what's going on at quarterback right now? Because there are 2 things out there, the best that I can tell. There's the Mendoza issue, who ends up, taking a visit to Georgia, then makes his pledge elsewhere. I've been trying to figure out the entire time how real that even is with the former Cal quarterback. I just don't know what to make about that. There's also the social media post out there of the very cryptic message from Carson Beck based on a sweatshirt that he's holding up about who wants me. Fans going to try to interpret that a bunch of different ways. Like, what do you make of the sort of unknown commodities at quarterback right now of, does Georgia want to bring someone in? What's Carson Beck's future look like? How secure is this with Gunnar Stockton? What do you make of the way in which the quarterback position factors into the overall portal discussion that's ongoing with UGA?
It is not surprising to me that there is uncertainty at the quarterback position, and I think that in large part it stems from the injury to Carson Beck, and I think a lot of this would have played out in the time after Georgia's season had come to an end, with Carson Beck obviously suffering the elbow injury, undergoing surgery, outlining all this and putting an opportunity in front of Gunnar Stockton. I think forces Georgia maybe to consider moving up that timeline a little bit into who they are looking at and what that succession plan might be. I would say that while, yes, there was the Dylan Lonergan reported interest, the Mendoza thing, which never for me passed the sniff test, because I found it most interesting that we somehow found out about the visit after it happened rather than on the front end. So I think for me, when it comes to the quarterback position, the number one thing that I'm watching right now, how does Gunnar Stockton play as the starter? Because there's a very good chance if he fulfills the Georgia fans' dreams on here, I think that we're not having a discussion about what the quarterback position looks like come January 21st, or even maybe before that if he goes out and plays well. So I know that Gunnar Stockton resonates with guys on this team. They want to rally around him. He's got an opportunity in front of him to lead this team, and I understand the worries about where Carson Beck might be going and what he is doing with his future, as well as what Georgia looks for in the transfer portal. But if Gunnar Stockton goes out there, and this sort of harkens back to your point, BA, Gunnar Stockton goes out there and plays well against Notre Dame, I don't know how much any other quarterback discussion matters going forward, because if he's good enough in a situation like that, well, he'll have led Georgia to a second half comeback against Texas, a college football playoff team, and then gone out and beaten Notre Dame in his first start. I think that says plenty about his capabilities and what he might be able to do moving forward for Georgia.
Yeah, Mike, I'll give you the last word on this because I know you got to go. Same thing on quarterback as I said about wide receiver. Whether Carson Beck plays in the NFL next year, plays for Georgia, plays for another team, whether, Georgia brings in a transfer like a Dylan Lonergan that sort of feels like the kind of guy I think they might have looked after, or a guy like Mendoza who's been a starter before. Ultimately, I'm a lot more interested in seeing how Gunner plays, certainly next week and hopefully a couple of games after that here this season, and letting all of that sort of fall in place based on how Gunner looks. I just don't know how much I ever, really kind of bought into the idea of a Mendoza, who I guess is going to go to Indiana. I just don't know how much I ever really bought into any of that.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I think Connor's point is valid. I mean, this is one heck of an audition for Gunner Stockton. I mean, who's to say he's not the next Dylan Gabriel, right? I mean, he's not tall and statuesque, and he may never start on your fantasy football team, but can he win college football championships? And is this in this day and age just the way Georgia's going to be built? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what we're not talking about, it's not nearly as sexy, but my goodness, the defensive linemen, the outside linebackers, the inside linebackers, the corners, the safeties, those are incredible football players that Georgia has year in and year out. They're the envy of the country defensively, top to bottom, I believe. And that's even with, maybe Stackhouse and Brinson, maybe not measuring up quite yet. They've got a couple games left on their treads, though, to earn some draft stock. And I think that you're going to see some very inspired play. But what we always focus and gravitate on offense. The reality is there's two sides of the ball. And defensively, I believe top to bottom, Georgia matches up with anybody in the country. And Kirby, excuse me, puts a lot of eggs in that basket. Now, how good do you have to be at quarterback? I mean, we've all got our Stetson Bennett stories and certainly some fourth quarter legends, but you don't see him starting in the NFL. You don't have to have, a future NFL MVP at quarterback to win national championships. And at the end of the day, that's really what this is about. And if you have a mobile quarterback like a Gunner, who's to say Jaden Rashada doesn't fill out his frame? I mean, there's a reason Georgia signed him. It wasn't just for the heck of it. Who's to say Ryan Puglisi doesn't learn a little lesson from that, misstep scramble and, sprain knee, whatever, put him aside. This guy's got a gun. There's a reason why Kirby's calling his name out on the microphone. He wouldn't be dogging this guy and calling him out if he didn't think this guy had some potential. So Georgia doesn't necessarily have to have the number 1, number 5, number 8 offense in the country to be winning national championships. And if Kirby decides that he'd rather have 4 linebackers that are first 2-round guys versus 1 quarterback at the same price point, who's to say that his logic is wrong? At the end of the day, as much white knuckling or worrying as anybody does about this, you've got the best coach in the country and arguably the best staff, and these guys know what they're doing. And that's not to say we shouldn't have interest or we shouldn't debate or it's not worth discussion. But I think Kirby Smart has a pretty good idea what he has. And to Connor's point, we don't really know the ceiling for Gunner Stockton yet. I know this, and Connor wrote a story about Jake Fromm, what he said recently, and there was an interview you did, Brandon, from way back in the spring of 2023 when Jake broke down the 3 quarterbacks. And Gunner was the guy he said was in the film room. Gunner was the guy at the high IQ. Anybody that thinks Gunner Stockton's going to go out there against Notre Dame and look lost is sadly mistaken. This guy is going to know all the checks, all the reads. He's going to know where to audible to. He's going to know where to check to the runs. I mean, this is one assignment sound dude. And then you put on top of it, that he's a football player first. And these guys do love him. He is the guy you want to play for. I mean, you saw that. Hopefully there's no World War II veterans offended, but that was a kamikaze run. I mean, like a Japanese Zero going into a ship, man. That guy wasn't turning back short of anything he could get on that play. That's who he is. There is something special in this dude. And who's to say, like Connor said, that he doesn't win that job? And that maybe Rashada and Puglisi are on deck, or there's an off-season competition, and Georgia says, you know what? We're going to be good enough here. We're going to spend our money on offensive linemen. We're going to continue to have premium tight end. We're going to continue to have 3-tool receivers that are willing to do A, B, and C. Maybe you don't get that, marquee 1,500-yard guy that doesn't want to block or play special teams. I don't think Kirby wants him. I don't know how many guys are like that are really out there. Receiver's kind of a me-first position, and Georgia's not a me-first program. So for all the, hand-wringing and concern at the end of the day, I feel pretty confident that Georgia knows how to use their resources. They'll continue to be one of the best defenses in the country. They'll continue to be elite on special teams, and they'll continue to have a very strong supporting cast and a sound offensive game plan that doesn't beat themselves. And like Jeff says, it's up to everybody else to figure out how to catch this program. Everybody in the country seems ready for that. Nobody wants to give Georgia credit for what they did this year. But, folks, it ain't happened. It ain't happened yet. And BA, I know you're still not as confident as I am, but it ain't. Make your reservations for Atlanta. It ain't happening in New Orleans. It ain't catching him in Miami. Somebody's going to have to get him in Atlanta. Nobody's going to get him before then.
All right, Mike, we'll look forward to a lot more. Sorry, Leo, we'll look forward to a lot more coverage from you coming up in the days to come here. I know you got to bounce out for right now, so we appreciate you being a part of our DawgNation Daily Roundtable here today. We got plenty more to come with Jeff and Connor, but Mike, thanks for your time here today.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you guys soon.
See you, Mike.
It's a DawgNation Daily here presented by Kroger. Good stuff there. And, of course, plenty of great things going on at Kroger as we get ready for a brand new year, too, including right now the chance to try Kroger Boost for free for 30 days here. You can save up to $1,000 per year when you earn twice the fuel points, and you get free grocery delivery with your friends there at Kroger in this great membership opportunity. It's called Kroger Boost. So check it out online, Kroger.com/boost for more on that. That's Kroger.com/boost for more on that. Okay, we can talk plenty more about the transfer portal stuff. Let's kind of put a pin in that for right now, though, and a transition here. We're going to go around the doghouse presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law here for a moment and address, if you've been kind of like me, the honest truth is, 25th, 26th, second, New Year, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, yesterday, sort of away from football for the most part. And so when you kind of get back into it, Connor, one of the first things you sort of bump into is the fact that there's, a ton of published reports out there as relates to Roderick Robinson, the running back who had obviously been working his way back. One of the things I think you liked about Georgia going to the playoffs, the running back room probably healthier than it had been all season long. In the case of Trevor Etienne, that's obviously, I think, still true. But it certainly sounds like, based on a lot of rumblings and grumblings coming out of Georgia practice here, that Georgia once again will be without Roderick Robinson. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it sounds like he's dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury. In all likelihood, he's going to be out for the remainder of the playoffs. It also sounds like Georgia is not likely to get back Branson Robinson either. He's been dealing with a knee injury since that Mississippi State game. So your two biggest running backs in terms of mass, Roderick Robinson and Branson Robinson, you're likely to be without. And that's just going to put more on the plate of Trevor Etienne, who we did see wear down over the course of the season before valiantly coming back in the SEC championship game and delivering what I thought was his best performance of the season. And it's going to put a lot on Nate Frazier, who we've seen some ups and downs with him. He's had some incredible runs and has run hard and been able to make it through this season. He's also had some fumble issues that have been persistent throughout the season, and I don't necessarily know if that's something that can get fixed in a few weeks. And when we're playing with a quarterback like Gunnar Stockton, what it does, and you saw Georgia do this in the second half of the game against Texas, they're going to try and shrink the game down and limit the number of possessions when you have a new quarterback like a Gunnar Stockton. And that makes turnovers all the more critical. And you're going to have guys out there that can hold on to the football. And so they're going to need to find ways to play Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier, with Georgia without the Robinsons moving forward now. And it's going to make ball security for this position group all the more crucial, just given what we have seen out of that unit this year.
Jeff, how much do you think this sets Georgia back on the field? I mean, for Rod personally, I obviously hate it for him because this is a guy who's working really hard to be a productive player for Georgia. And, this is just, kind of bad luck. I don't think you chalk it up to anything other than that. But in terms of a Georgia team that, statistically speaking, has not been great running the football this year, but perhaps one of the places you would seek out some confidence for Georgia in the postseason because Etienne is back and, Robinson seemingly getting healthier too, and Frazier now has more experience. Well, now you sort of subtract one of those names off of this. What kind of setback on the field do you believe this is for Georgia?
Brennan, I thought this Georgia team had kind of an extra gear for the playoffs. I thought they would get a couple of those big bodies back, and they would be awfully hard to get on the ground. They would just batter away at teams. I think that was ideal for the skill set of Roderick Robinson and Branson Robinson. Listen, I've been covering Roderick since his junior year when he was committed to UCLA before he flipped to Georgia. And I think there's two storylines that have always been around Roderick. The first one of those is he's simply a mauler, a machine. The second of those is he's coming back from something. And that's what he's always been. He's always been fighting to come back from an injury or playing through an injury. I think what it means now for Georgia, Brandon, is it gives Georgia a little bit of time to see how much they can get Chauncey Bowens ready. He's probably that one big, thick back in the room they have now. Now, he's just a true freshman, but we all believe by the time you get to game 13, 14, 15, you're no longer a true freshman in the SEC. So I think that's what Georgia has to do. I think you keep going down the backfield. There's also Cash Jones, but we know what Cash Jones is and what he can do. And then there is also Dwight Phillips Jr., who got dinged up a little bit in the SEC championship game. The stable could have been tremendously wealthy for Georgia during the playoffs because all of a sudden Georgia could have been rocking out there with a 230-pound back, 240-pound back. They didn't have any tread on the tire for this year and was fresh, and they were going to wear defenses down. I think that changes things now.
We'll get more broadly into the Sugar Bowl here coming up. Let me remind you, though, that's Around the Doghouse presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. And, of course, I love Zagoria Law because of the very narrow focus they have in a very specific area of the law. If you or someone you know has been bitten or injured by a dog that wasn't yours, you're walking through the park, dog off a leash comes up to you or in your neighborhood, something like that, crazy stuff happens. If that's your story, obviously you want the compensation you deserve, it like any other personal injury situation. And that's what our friends at Zagoria Law are going to work to get for you. They literally wrote the book on how to win cases like these. So I want you to reach out to them today. You can give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally in this case, D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. You can also find them online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com, the official dog bite injury lawyers, the Georgia Bulldogs. So if you or someone you love has been bitten by a dog, injured by a dog that wasn't properly cared for by its owner, let our friends at Zagoria Law work to get you the compensation you deserve. Great to have Zagoria Law as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. And of course, with that, we'll kind of transition kind of into some, I guess, more broad, conversation with the Sugar Bowl here right now. And, Connor, I don't want to put myself at the center of all of this, but, Mike did point it out. Like, I just think that one of the things that you have to address about Georgia going into this game, even though I believe that Georgia obviously has a great chance of winning this, we really haven't seen Georgia play for 4 quarters, 60 full minutes. We haven't really seen them play a great football game yet. They've gotten great wins, blowing out Clemson, beating Texas twice, handling Tennessee. Those are all great wins. And they've had courageous performances coming back against Georgia Tech, and you could probably cite other examples. There have certainly been plenty of very good moments for Georgia, but the sort of dominant version of UGA that we've come to expect, I don't know how much we've really gotten from Georgia, on that this season. So I believe it's a little bit flippant, it's a little bit trite to sort of say, no matter what, it's going to show up next week in New Orleans when it really hasn't shown up in that way all year long. I think the point spread odds makers here probably have this right. I do believe this is probably a close game against Notre Dame next week. Even if Georgia wins, I believe it probably wins close. Do you think that I'm wrong?
I would agree with you there. And to the excuse me, to the point that you were largely making, we've seen 13 games of this Georgia team this year. In just about every game, they've played about, with maybe the exception of the Ole Miss contest, they've played about 45 minutes of good winning football. And then there's about 15 minutes in just about every game, whether it be the UMass game, the Tennessee game, even the Texas game, where they play anywhere from average to bad football. And as we get to the stretch run here later in the season where you're playing college football playoff opponents, Notre Dame, Penn State, Boise State, potentially, those 15 minutes, if they're bad enough, are enough to lose you a game. I think that is what happened against Alabama, where they're down 28-0, 4 possessions into the game there that day. And you could very well see something happen again, because as much as we like Gunnar Stockton and are optimistic about what you're going to be able to do with him, I know not everyone is a huge fan of Carson Beck. I understand that. But with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, the margin of error you have is just reduced. You're going to have to play a different style of football to win with Gunnar Stockton. I think you're going to have to rely more on the running game, both Frazier and Etienne, but also Gunnar Stockton's legs. And naturally relying more on the running game is just going to shorten the game. And so you have a smaller margin of error in that regard. And ultimately, I think that's why you're going to see a close game. You're going to see a low point spread total number. We'll see. Georgia, I believe, favored right now, could end up swinging back to Notre Dame depending on how things go here. But it's a Georgia team with Carson Beck out. The number of ways that they can win a football game is reduced, and they're going to have to play a certain style, in my opinion, to go and win the fights that they're going to have to win.
Jeff, what do you think?
So I think the thing with this game is it's like such the unknown with Gunner. Brandon, we all know, everybody's heard the stories. He's got so much with his legs. He's tough. Brandon, he can throw rockets. That's one thing where if we're looking from a pure talent consideration here, I think Gunner is the more talented football player than Riley Leonard. It's just Riley has all these years and years of experience. And listen, we know how much experience is, because even in Kirby Smart's program, the more talented guy will sit behind the guy with a lot more experience. Kirby just knows what you can and cannot do. And that's a safety measure for the way he's built this great program. People forget, man, Ryan Puglisi, Jaden Rashada, Gunnar Stockton, they were all more highly rated prospects than Carson Beck coming out of high school. And listen, when you got to win a game like this, when you don't have a lot of film, I think in the 1, 2, 3 game sample size, I think Gunnar will be good for Georgia. I think he will, especially when you have the layoff between Texas and Notre Dame. I don't think his style would last a long time in the SEC, but I think it can last through this run. It also opens up, guys, we all noticed this. Not only was there juice when Gunnar got in there, there was also running lanes. Things happened for Georgia. ETN's yards gobbled up much quicker. Frazier found holes a lot quicker. Yes, the offensive line was blocking harder for Gunnar because that's a guy everyone on the team universally loves. But I think Georgia's offense changes a lot with Gunnar Stockton. I like a lot of the things Georgia has, but let's not pretend ourselves, Brendan. The way Georgia was going to beat Notre Dame is they were going to have bedrock defense, excellent special teams, and then they were going to have to take care of the football, because that's what Notre Dame's going to try to do. They're going to try to action situate and emphasize their run game. I think Georgia probably needs to find a little bit more juice. I've been watching this. Oscar Delp has been a different player over the last month than he was in the first 8 games of the year. They're going to have to find new cast of characters here. Maybe Arian Smith catches 1 or 2 more balls per game. Maybe they find another receiver, Brandon. I think it's just the thing where Georgia, the wars that they've been through the SEC. You had a good point earlier, Brandon, when you're like, I think Georgia just flips the switch for about 10 key minutes in every game, and then they stifle the opponent. That just might be what this team is. I'm kind of fascinated hearing from a lot of folks about the Georgia Notre Dame comparison, and they somehow bring up Georgia Tech. That seems ludicrous because Tech didn't have its starter during the game. But at some point, when you're supposed to be beaten and your rival takes you to 8 overtimes, at some point I might look at that game. I think I do look at that game as that's kind of a badge of honor where you don't go down. Like, what if Ohio State would have went to 8 overtimes to beat Michigan? You think they would have cared? No. I think that's a point where you should have been beat. You were beat, but you wouldn't allow yourself to be beat even with a backup quarterback. I don't know whether the story of this team will be ultimate resiliency amongst obstacle after obstacle, or it's just the talent, the culture, the buy-in allows Georgia to get by a lot of these teams that are not as blessed in all those areas.
And, Connor, I think a lot of the fixation on quarterback is understandable because that position always gets a lot of attention. And with Stockton coming in the way that he did, it obviously increases the drama for, I don't mean that in a negative way, but just the theatrics, for Georgia at that position with Stockton coming in. But for me, the other side of the ball is just as equal a question. I mean, as crazy as this sounds, I think one of the big looming questions I would have about Georgia is, can they play elite defensively against a team other than Texas? Because for whatever reason, they have had Texas' number this year. And I don't quite know why that is. And that's obviously a pretty good team to say you've had their number. But honestly, Georgia's had a hard time matching that performance against lesser teams. 30-plus points allowed to Mississippi State, a gazillion rushing yards allowed to Georgia Tech. I mean, I would put the Clemson, the Tennessee game also in the good category for Georgia defensively too, so let's not make this something that it's not. But against lesser teams, Georgia has had a hard time matching that performance. So what you get from the Georgia defense, to be frank, I think is just as curious for me as what you get from what we expect to be a new-look Georgia offense.
And you look at what Georgia has struggled with, in particularly throughout this season. It's a mobile quarterback like a Riley Leonard. Now, he's not as fast as Jalen Milroe is, but he's certainly slippery, and he's certainly capable enough of using his legs, and that's impacted how Georgia has rushed the passer. Like the simplest thing in my mind, in Georgia's 2 games against Texas, they have 13 sacks, and that's just a huge benefit to this defense, which at times, has had trouble getting off the field on third downs. They've been a little bit penalty prone because of the aggressiveness to which they always play defense. And so I think the big thing in this game, it's putting Notre Dame in third and long, third and obvious passing down situations, and then being able to get off the field. And they weren't always able to do that against Georgia Tech most recently in that regard. And even against Texas, they gave up a few third and long completions there. So I think the big thing, you obviously have to win on first and second down. And if you're able to do that, and again, limit what Riley Leonard is able to do with his legs, that's the key to stopping this Notre Dame offense. Because it's just like, we're not going to beat around the bush here. They don't have the talent to push the ball and take advantage of Georgia on the outside. There just is not a wide receiver in my mind that is capable of doing that. And I don't think that Riley Leonard is a good enough pure passer in that regard. But with his legs and his ability to extend plays and their ability to run the ball well on early downs, that's going to be critical, because if Notre Dame is able, like Georgia Tech, to find themselves in 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 3s, and extend drives, that's where it gets tough for this Georgia defense. And so they've got to find a way to obviously win on first and second down, and then find ways to get off the field on third down. It sounds really simple, but at times this year we've seen Georgia defense struggle with that, especially with a quarterback as mobile as Riley Leonard.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Brendan, how many teams, this is a quick open-ended thought, how many teams has Georgia played this year that are better than Notre Dame? How many would you honestly say?
I would say Texas for sure. And to be frank, I don't know that anyone other than Texas is definitely better than Notre Dame. Can't say that about Clemson. I cannot say that about Tennessee. I mean, keep this in mind. Look, I'm as much as anybody willing to say, hey, there have been so many instances in kind of what we think of as the modern era of college football where Notre Dame was hyped only to be overrated. 2012 BCS title game, a couple of times in the college football playoff, other times to a lesser degree in that conversation too. Look, this is still a Notre Dame team that went on the road week 1 and a raucous Kyle Field in Texas A&M won that game by double-digit points. That is a quality win. Yes, they also lost Northern Illinois, but they came into the SEC, the teeth of the SEC, noisy venue, things like that, won the game easily. Like, I don't think this is a bad football team. Now, is it sort of classic overrated Notre Dame? Maybe the result sort of ends up suggesting that, but if you got to go on the record about something right now, I think Notre Dame's better than Penn State is. If Georgia's playing Penn State this weekend, I believe I'm less concerned about that than I am or next week, I should say. I think that Notre Dame's better than Penn State, and I believe this is probably the second best team that Georgia's played all season long.
I think it's the 3rd best team. I think Ole Miss is a better team than Notre Dame is, and I think Notre Dame's better than Tennessee. Alabama, I'd probably put them on the same tier. Again, it depends. Is Alabama playing at home or are they playing on the road? Because they're very clearly just a different team away from Tuscaloosa this season. But I think, again, and I largely agree with what BA said there. This is not I think fraudulent Notre Dame team. Like, do they have the upper end athletes that say an Ohio State or an Oregon have? No, they don't. But this team knows what they are and has no problem playing to that style of fight. That being said, and BA, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Georgia is so clearly the best team that Notre Dame has played by, I would say, a wide margin.
That's true.
To this point in the year. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that by far. And to be fair, when Jeff asked me the question before, which I think is a good question, I was only thinking about the teams that Georgia had beaten. I do believe Ole Miss is way better than Notre Dame. I think Alabama probably is too. To be fair, I was only thinking about the teams that Georgia beat. I am very glad that Georgia's not playing either Alabama or Ole Miss. For 100%, context here, this is a much tougher game if Georgia's playing either Ole Miss or Alabama. But is Notre Dame better than most of the teams that Georgia's beaten this season? Based on their statistical profile, I believe that it probably is.
One of the things I said about that Georgia Tech Notre Dame example that I wanted to make a full point here is if Notre Dame should have extended Northern Illinois to as many overtimes as possible to win that game, especially at home. I use it as a comparison stick between these two programs for another reason. Tech obviously being a rival, Tech preparing for Georgia in the way that they do. And I think you guys kind of hit what I was thinking on. I just believe, call me an old school guy, but the more great teams you play, the more battles you're in, the better off you are to take on another one. And you look at you look at Notre Dame's season this year, there's USC, there's Louisville. There's a lot of teams that you sit there and you go, not quite Tennessee, maybe definitely not Alabama, not Ole Miss, not Texas. And I think that sort of thing matters, especially with the fact while we're just popping the hood on this football game, we all have to agree as well that this is the healthiest Georgia has been, perhaps since the opener.
I also want to respond to one comment. Armando Black said, I'm just being a worry wart over here, or a worry bug, as he called me. Listen, I don't like to do stuff like this because it come across as honest. We spent a week prior to the Georgia-Clemson game with me repeatedly saying that Georgia was going to win the game by 30-plus points. We weren't just right, we were precise. If I thought that Georgia was going to win this game by 40 points, I wouldn't have any problem coming on here and saying that, because I have. Also, when the whole world was wanting to fire everybody after the Alabama game, we called the win at Texas. We called the win at Tennessee, or win against Tennessee easy on the other side of Ole Miss. I don't like saying this kind of stuff because it comes across as immodest. We haven't just been accurate with our Georgia predictions. We have been specifically correct many, many times. So you cannot like the prediction, but you can go back and listen to what the track record has been this season. I think the results speak for themselves here. So if I'm wrong, it'll be among many instances in my lifetime that I have been. But this is a year in which we've mostly gotten our picks right as it relates to Georgia. Honesty compels me to admit.
Is BA cutting a promo here? Do we need to get his go with the flow record on right here? Armando Black, if you're going to come at the king, you best not miss.
We need to make sure we have the daddy stocking, BA stocking in the background that has daddy written over it.
That's right.
Who's your daddy? That's Brandon's Who's Your Daddy moment right there.
After going 14 games over 500 during the season, we were a documented 3-1 against the spread in last weekend's playoff games too. I don't like saying that kind of stuff, but if backed in the corner, I will respond. But let me just say it this way, though. Let's say I'm wrong, and let's say this is another instance of Notre Dame in a big spot being blown out, something they've done twice before in playoffs, twice before in the BCS title game, kind of in this 21st century. If I am wrong, Connor, why would I be wrong? If this game is not close, Georgia wins easily, then why is that?
Because the Georgia defense, in my opinion, swallows up Riley Leonard. I think that it would involve Georgia starting fast, getting out to, say, a 14-0 lead early in this game, first 20 minutes of this game, and forcing Notre Dame to play from behind, maybe abandon the run a little bit. And from there, you just see Notre Dame sort of get snowballed and overwhelmed. Look, Georgia just has not started games well at all this season. They're just a better team in the second half. I think we deserve a ton of credit for that. But they just don't start fast. They could not have started slower in the SEC championship game against Texas, and yet they still found a way to win that game. But with the way that I believe they're going to have to play now moving forward, starting fast and being to jump all over a team, I think is so critical. You think back to the 2021 playoff game against Michigan, where Georgia jumps out early, and Michigan, a team that was known for running the ball that year and being physical, it just became too tough for them to try and throw their way back into the game. I think that if you're looking for a Georgia blowout in this situation, it's the offense starting fast, them dialing up plays early and getting out to an early lead. And from there, sort of being able to really attack Riley Leonard when he drops back to pass, because that's what they're going to have to do to try and stay in and potentially win this game.
I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I got to pick up the pace here a little bit. Let me remind you that if you want to join us in New Orleans next week, you've got a great chance to do that. Our friends from Atlanta Sports Trips have got a DawgNation invasion they're planning with us here, so go to DawgNation.com/tailgate. It's a great party on New Year's Eve, the day before the game. It's an all-inclusive tailgate the day of the game. You want travel packages, which include your hotel stay. Our friends at ATL Sports Trips can help you out with that too. Big-time DawgNation invasion event going down in New Orleans next week. I'm excited about being a part of that. I think that New Orleans does big events so well, more so than, like, say, LA for the national championship, or, these other locations where sometimes you're really spread out at sort of hard to get places. New Orleans is all right there in a very sort of tourist friendly environment, great restaurants, great bars, great entertainment, great opportunities here. Please be a part of that with us. ATLsportstrips.com. Book your trip. We'll see you on New Year's Eve. We'll see you for the day of the game, big tailgate prior to it. And of course, inside the Superdome, where it's going to be rocking, and Georgia's going to fight its way to a win and keep its national championships alive. Our friends from ATL Sports Trips want you to be there with us for a DawgNation invasion. Go to atlsportstrips.com for a lot more on that. Let's also get ready to kind of go sort of a makeshift version of cruising around the SEC here, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and we'll kind of broaden things out for a moment and look at the other quarterfinal games here coming up. Jeff, I was pretty disappointed by the first round of the playoffs. I've said this now plenty. I love college football. My whole life, in many ways, is sort of wrapped around college football. Whatever the first round playoff games were, that's not the sport that I love. And I don't know what you do about it. I would have put more SEC teams in, but then the one SEC team that did play got blown out. So, got blown out. So, do with that what you will. But sort of spinning it forward, when you look at the other quarterfinal games that are about to take place here in Atlanta, Texas and Arizona State, obviously the traditional old school Rose Bowl with Oregon and Ohio State, Georgia, Notre Dame kind of in the mix with that. And then I guess Boise, Penn State, the other game. Are you expecting more entertaining quarterfinal games than we got from round one?
I would look at it as like, the first round was gluttony, TV inventory, Brandon. That's what I look at it. You just got excess programming to sell some commercials. One thing I do notice about that top half of the bracket, I think everybody clearly does, is that top half of the bracket, some team that makes it out of that is going to be bludgeoned to death. They're going to have significant either injuries or players that come through that gauntlet. I'm going to call it a gauntlet. I don't think Texas ASU will be competitive at all, Brandon. I think it's kind of funny that it looks like remember that Gary Stokan promise before the season about how many times Georgia would be back in Atlanta? It looks like Texas is going to play in Atlanta just as much as Georgia was this whole season. SEC championship game. Now they're back in Atlanta. 2 weeks later, if they get by Oregon or Ohio State, they'll be back. I think some of these games, I like the factor of Boise State here, Brandon. That's one of those things I think can be entertaining because they can run that rock. We did notice while Oregon was going through some issues earlier this year, maybe just play until football games. Everybody, I hope they've seen that 37-34 final when Oregon went toe-to-toe with Boise State. Boise's running back had almost 200 yards on the ground. I think that's a recipe for winning football. So Penn State, those, Happy Valley, I'd be a little worried about that game. I think Oregon, Ohio State will be another classic. I think this is a desperate Ohio State team, but it's also a team that when backed into a corner, which is it is the absolute corner right now for Ohio State. I think pound for pound, they're probably likely the most talented roster there, especially when they got Jeremiah Smith playing like he probably deserves some Heisman Trophy votes right behind everybody except Travis Hunter and Genty. I mean, Ohio State has something there. Can they beat Oregon again? Does the winner of them beat Texas again and then get to Atlanta? I think should Georgia matriculate its way through this bracket, I think they're going to be set up to have a little bit better of a shot considering what the top of the half of the bracket is going to have to go through.
Connor, this is one of those other things I sort of in the uncomfortable position of having to admit, but we sort of said this going into the last weekend that we thought it was going to be Georgia, Ohio State for the national championship. The most undervalued team coming into the playoff was Ohio State because everybody always does the same thing. History began with whatever the last game we saw was, right? And so people thought the only memory they had of college football was Ohio State lost to Michigan, therefore, everybody's going to get fired and everything is terrible. What we said was, when you look at the totality of the calendar year, it's been Ohio State, Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia. That very likely that's what the national championship ends up being too. Our pick was Georgia versus Ohio State for the national championship. The way they played against Tennessee certainly makes that half of the bracket more interesting, does it not?
First of all, Jeff, I mean, look, I don't know how many times you're going to pull up the tape on Go With The Flow this season where you just openly doubted Arizona State and the Sun Devils prove you wrong. Doubt Arizona State at your own peril there. Two, I think the bigger issue with the first round, and this is one of the cold, hard truths of college football that people don't really want to talk about, there's maybe 6 teams every year that are capable of winning a national championship. And when you put 12 of those teams in a college football playoff field, there just are not enough teams capable of truly going out there and winning a college football playoff. So we're still probably going to see a handful of blowouts here in the second round because, again, there's just not enough quality teams. And, I mean, you go back and look, there were blowouts in the 4-team playoff because some years there just aren't that quality of team to go out and win a 15, 16, potentially in some teams' cases, 17-game schedule. As far as Ohio State, I'll say this. They're not playing as well as they did against Tennessee as they will against Oregon. There's just no way. They played an absolute perfect game against Tennessee there in that day, and they deserve credit for that. And that's what their A-game looks like. And their A-game, to your point, BA, looks better than anyone's A-game in the country. But Oregon's still going to give them a test. And so I'm interested in seeing how Oregon counters with that, how they get healthy, how they took advantage of going out there and winning and playing games. And so I'm super excited to see that Rose Bowl. And then on the Georgia side of the bracket, I do agree with Jeff. I think this Boise State team is a little bit of a live dog. I know that Penn State blew out SMU. They got 2 early pick sixes in that game, and the offense, quite frankly, didn't exactly do a ton to inspire confidence, which has always sort of been the issue with this Penn State team. So I'm excited to see what Boise State and Penn State looks like. That game's going to be played on December 31st. And then you've got this Georgia-Notre Dame game where, Georgia a little bit hobbled without Carson back, a new quarterback coming in there, and there's some uncertainty. And I'll say this, the national media really seems to love Notre Dame. Don't let our Kaylee Manziel hear this, but there are a lot of people that think Notre Dame can be a team that gets to the national championship game. And so I'm super excited to sort of see with Georgia, with some public doubt, a healthy amount of skepticism, them getting to play with their chip on a shoulder in a way that they, quite frankly, haven't had the ability to legitimately, in my opinion, do so in recent years.
No, I think that's really right. It's a comfortable position for Georgia fans to be in with people doubting them and saying whatever. Georgia fans are just happier living in that world. Over the next few days, you probably get the chance to do what you enjoy. That is Cruising Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Want to see all on board Utopia of the Seas with us coming up in April. We're kind of almost to the new year, which means we're sort of in that sort of final stage of, hey, get ready to be a part of that before it sells out. It obviously will. Utopia of the Seas is an incredibly hot product right now. You probably saw a lot of those commercials if you're watching football this weekend. They're kind of all over the place. Everybody loves and everybody's talking about Utopia of the Seas. And in April, you have a chance to sail on it with us. So give Jessica Slater a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com and be a part of the awesome experience on the newest of the Royal Caribbean ships, the final in that Oasis class of ships. It is a gorgeous vessel. You have a chance to be on it with us for our Dog Nation cruise. All right, the time we have left here, let's get ready to kind of give you a long finish presented today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And Connor, I love this time of year because even though the sort of new playoff means the bowl week looks a little bit different, I do love the idea that you still get kind of a classic, fans get a chance to hear from more Georgia players than ever at any point in time during the season, more Georgia coaches. You get a chance. We're going to show you some video from Georgia practice later on today, no matter what it is. If it's yoga or whatever else, we'll still show it to you.
From some high-quality stretching.
Yeah, it's still more interesting than nothing, I reckon. But either way, give us an idea of what kind of, today's Friday, the game is Wednesday, so the weekend will include traveling to New Orleans and all that kind of stuff, both from a media standpoint and Georgia for a team itself. Give us an idea of what these sort of next few days are going to look like.
Yeah, we're going to get a chance to, potentially get some answers. We're going to hear from Glenn Schumann today, a couple of defensive players. On Saturday, we get to talk to Mike Bobo for the first time since August. We'll see how forthcoming he is on Gunnar Stockton and what he has to say there, but I'm sure you can go check out Jeff Sentell's story on DawgNation, sort of detailing Gunnar Stockton and his rise and everything that has led him to this moment. And so we're going to get a chance to hear from, 2 of the more important assistant coaches. And then on Monday, we're going to get a chance to talk to a lot of different players and people in the build up to this game. And so I think if you're a fan that's excited about this Notre Dame game and the college football playoff run in particular, we're going to have a ton of content for you to feed you in that regard. If you're someone who's looking forward to the future and thinking about, what this team might look like next year, what freshmen like Ellis Robinson, Chris Cole, Nitro Tuggle have to say about how their first seasons went, you're going to have the chance to hear some of that as well. So it's an exciting time for your Georgia fan if you're sort of craving some information and looking to learn a little bit more about this team. It's a fun time, and this is why Georgia gets to play in these big games and why we're so excited to get a chance to bring some of that to you.
Jeff, you're also part of the coverage today in Athens and this weekend starting in New Orleans. Give me a sense of what you're looking forward to.
So all the smart guys on our team and all the media tribe, they think that Kirby's going to camouflage these guys in different position groups. So if anybody's got a chance to ID that 5-star wide receiver roaming around by their practice gear or their swag or their arm sleeve or something like that, I guess I'm best qualified to do so. We're going to try and get pictures of all the early enrollees, the ones that are on campus. A lot of them rolled in. Like we wrote on DawgNation.com, they came in waves. Brandon, there were some that were reporting last week during the Georgia High School State Championships or right after. Then there were others that showed up either late Christmas night or yesterday, finding out lots of roommates, like really cool roommates. I think Ryan Montgomery and Landon Rodan are rooming together. Talon Taylor and Tyler J. Williams are rooming together. CJ Wiley and Ethan Barbour are rooming together. That speaks naturally, of course, but this is a time where I'm going to be curious. I'm going to talk to a lot of the guys that I know really well on this kind of open media session where I can ask Ellis Robinson, man, how's your freshman year gone? Like, what's the thing that, one of the things I've always heard is that Ellis Robinson knows what he needs to do in order to crack the lineup and get more reps. So it'd be interesting to talk to Ellis about that. It'd be interesting to see some of these super freshmen. I call them that. There's Nate Frazier. There's Chris Cole. Even guys like Jaden Ruddell. Somebody might have a good theory cooking right now that what if Georgia gets Nitro Tuggle a lot more touches in the offense, kind of like what Georgia tried to do with Justin Fields a couple years ago to cement himself in his place coming back for next year. I think that's important. I think Nitro Tuggle operating where he could be in year 2 at Georgia is probably a better long-term investment than a Dane Key or some of these other receivers that have been one-year rentals in the portal. I expect a Sokovie White to make a big jump into his second season, maybe to use some of this postseason to do so. But, Brandon, this is a long finish, man. I'm gonna pull my honesty compels me to admit card in the middle of our roundtable here. Tell me I'm wrong on this, Brandon. This is the one thing I keep coming back to about this football game. I hope everybody, all these smart thinking Dog fans know that Notre Dame's leading receiver has 3 touchdown catches. Notre Dame's leading receiver, I believe, has about 454 yards. This is a chip I'm coming into this game with. It's going to be harder for Notre Dame to throw the ball than it will be for Georgia to throw the ball in this football game, specifically considering the Georgia defense. You also look at it, Notre Dame's second leading rusher, Brandon, is their quarterback, Riley Leonard, with 751 yards. Like, what does Kirby Smart and Georgia do better than anything? They take away what you do best. So Georgia's going to try and make Notre Dame one-handed. They're going to try to make Notre Dame throw the ball to beat them. Tell me I'm wrong on that.
Kirby Smart's not Bill Belichick. First of all, let's be easy there. He's not Bill Belichick in terms of taking away the thing the other team does best. So I think Notre Dame's going to have some success running the ball.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I certainly hope that you turn out to be right about that. But I mean, if Georgia always took away what the other team did best, then Haynes King would have been in handcuffs, on that day after Thanksgiving. And unfortunately, that just simply was not the case. So certainly Georgia has the capability of doing anything it wants at any point in time. But if I'm being honest, marshaling those forces has not always been easy for Georgia to do. When it shows up, boy, does it show up. And it has been a thing of beauty a few times this year. And it'd be great to think they can kind of call that on command next Wednesday. And they very well might. But there are enough counterexamples this season where I at least have to wonder. Is that fair?
Yeah,
That's fair.
We'll make that our long finish presented by the Finnish Long Drink. Of course, you can find the long drink online, longdrink.com. Enjoy whether it be the cranberry, the traditional, it's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. As you're getting ready for a great New Year's Eve party or something like that, big game watch party, the Finnish Long Drink goes great with that. You can find out more online at the longdrink.com. Also, before I get ready to say goodbye to these guys who've been so generous with their time today, let me also remind you about our friends at Beaver Toyota of Cumming. I'm here at home today, and obviously it kind of feels good now to be getting out and about and have to go around. Did you know if you're looking for the great next vehicle in your life, you can do your shopping experience right from the comfort of your own home, the same way I'm doing this here right now? That is exactly what Beaver Toyota provides for the chance to do. You can shop online, you can pick out the make and the color and all the stylings that you need, all at the website, beavertoyotacumming.com. In fact, they'll even deliver the vehicle to you after you make that decision. So it's not just convenient, it's also kind of fun to kind of do this. And boy, it doesn't get any easier than the same way you get your groceries delivered or your pizza delivered to your house or whatever other food you want to eat delivered to your house. You can get your next vehicle delivered to your house there as well. So find out more online, beavertoyotacumming.com for more on that today. All right, the next time we do DawgNation Daily, we'll be live in New Orleans. Looking forward to that. It'll be a part of the big Media Day event in New Orleans, getting ready for Georgia and Notre Dame. Can't wait to see you there for that. Connor and Jeff, thanks so much for your time here today. We appreciate that. We'll look forward to seeing a bunch from you over the course of the next few days in Athens and then in New Orleans. Appreciate that today there as well.
Yep. Have a good day, everyone.
And everybody else here, thanks so much for being a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Looking forward to a fun week, getting ready for the Sugar Bowl. Can't wait to do that with you. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video, time now for our RS Andrews Cool Down. RS Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Of course, we're glad to have R.S. Andrews as a part of all of this today. So you get a little bit of a flavor of what we're kind of thinking from the Sugar Bowl there. And the only issue that I'm going to come back to is that when it comes to making a prediction about this game, you have to consider every data point, not just the most recent data point or not just the data points that are most favorable or, whatever else. If you want to make the most accurate prediction, you have to consider all the data points. And all of the data points considered leads me to believe that Georgia probably wins this game close. That's what I'm probably expecting to happen. But if I'm wrong, certainly I'll come on here and allow all of you to tell me why I was, because that's just sort of the way we do that. We've also got some time here for your comments. Not a ton of time here today, though, because we do have to get ready to go to Athens later on today for some live coverage here on the DawgNation video channels of Georgia practice, what comes out of these Georgia press conferences. We're going to cover all of that here coming up in a little bit. But for now, we'll take some time to get some of your thoughts here just for a few minutes, both at DawgNation.com and on the other comment sections, too. Commenter says, I think that Georgia being healthy is huge for the Dogs. I think that's certainly true. Georgia appears to be, in many ways, healthier than they've been. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I know that Notre Dame's also dealing with a couple of key injuries. So that's one of the things that's perhaps working in Georgia's favor, especially in the case of Trevor Etienne, because his presence for the game against Texas obviously made, in many ways, this look like a very different offense. Wyatt Fielding asked about Media Day. So Media Day for the Sugar Bowl is actually Monday. So I am leaving to go to New Orleans on Sunday. So I'm going to probably miss, and our Cody Chavins will do a great job of this, I'm going to probably miss one of my favorite things, which is when the team first arrives in New Orleans at the airport. I'm going to probably miss that, but we'll have live coverage for you on the DawgNation video channels of that. But then we're going to be live for the show. It's going to be a very different show on Monday. It is going to be a total free-for-all in the room for Georgia Media Day. That means, like, on the show, we're just going to be talking to coaches and players live. It's going to be a total chaotic scene, but I love that sort of thing. So we're going to do that for you on Monday. Very different version of our show then for that. So that should be a lot of fun. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to essentially treat that, especially Wednesday, we're going to treat it as a DawgNation Daily day and a game day. So we'll do a show on Wednesday morning, and then we'll kind of roll into game day after that. So yeah, that's what we'll do. Gary Roach enjoyed the roundtable. I appreciate that. I'm glad to know that you did. Let's see what else. DT says I am Munsoning again. I mean, look, here's the one thing that, as I said before, like, I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail about how correct our predictions have been this year, because nobody wants to hear that. But the one thing that our predictions and the accuracy of them is sort of based on is the fact that, for the most part, the mood of the comment section is always based on the last thing that happened. So if Georgia lost a game, it's miserable in the comment section. And oftentimes I'm expressing a point of view that's built on more than just the most recent data point. If Georgia won a game, all of a sudden everybody's ready to conquer the world. And I just think, if anything, to put things in simple terms, sometimes my job is reminding people of stuff other than the most recent data point, because that's just the way that it goes. William Rozier, and I don't know if is it Rozier, like Mike Rozier, the former Nebraska running back, or Rozier? William, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, because I'm sure on one side or the other I have. He says, can Stockton throw the ball in 2 minutes if we get down late? Obviously, I don't expect Gunnar Stockton to be as accomplished of a passer as Carson Beck. I do believe, just based on Beck's experience, he's a more accomplished thrower than what Gunnar Stockton is likely to be against Notre Dame. In fact, the overall stat line for Stockton, what was it, 16 completions for 74 yards in the game against Texas. He's got to be better as a thrower than that against Notre Dame. But can he be? I absolutely believe that he can be. Could he perhaps be very effective in a 2-minute situation? I believe that he possibly could. If healthy, Carson Beck would still be the better thrower right now. But next year, this has a very good chance of being Gunner's team. So in many ways, we're just getting a preview in the playoff and with a shot at a national championship for what the entirety of next season could be all about. So the answer to your question is, of course, those capabilities for him exist. And I do believe in that situation, Georgia will trust him. I think in a normal game plan, normal circumstances, I think they're going to try to I think they're going to try to create moments that set Gunner up and the entirety of the offense up for as much success as possible. By the way, I showed this off a little earlier. Let me also kind of showcase here. My daughter Kate got me a Santa Claus Georgia hat here, so I'll wear that for a little bit. My big head, it's a little bit hard, to do. So yeah, that's the thing. Armando Black pointing out that Notre Dame also lost to Northern Illinois. That's 100% true. 100% that's the case. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Cannot dispute that. Cannot dispute that. On the subject of transfers and things like that, Andrew Hughes says, I'd rather Kirby spend money on freshmen rather than portal. So, yeah, I mean, look, when the season's over, obviously we would very quickly get interested in whatever's going to happen for Georgia in 2025. And I do think at a certain point, Georgia, like every team in college football, even with the new revenue sharing that's on the way, this is still going to be an issue, I think, anyway. Georgia's going to have to think about how it chooses to allocate its money. At a certain point, whether you're Texas or Georgia or anybody in between, from an NIL standpoint, at a certain point, you've raised all the money you're going to raise, and now it's about how you choose to budget that money. That's just kind of what it's going to come down to. And so there could be some hard questions in the future about how Georgia chooses to budget its money. And if you want to win the battle for so-and-so player at so-and-so position, that might mean that certain players currently on your team, they just may need to be okay with less money. This is the way the NFL works, right? It's like if you're the Chiefs, for instance, if you're going to pay Patrick Mahomes $8 gazillion, then you're going to have a lot of wide receivers on the cheap. And the Chiefs have been pretty good at using a lot of wide receivers on the cheap. Now, they're also not scoring a ton of points right now, so eventually maybe that catches up with you. But there is literally only so much money, whether there's an official hard cap like the NFL or just sort of natural budget constraints, which probably exist in college football. At a certain point, you've got the money you have, and how do you choose to use it? That's what the future of college football looks like. Right now, it certainly seems like Georgia is putting a lot of money into roster retention and high school recruiting. And as long as you are, as Georgia is right now, one of the probably, three most likely national champions in college football, we can't say that Georgia's making a bad decision. Whether they actually win this year or not, there aren't very many teams, if any, that have a better chance of winning the national championship than Georgia does. So their strategy for now is working. But there could come a moment in which Georgia has to evolve its way of thinking because maybe eventually you have even less roster strength than you have right now. Maybe that could come. But for now, what Georgia's doing, bringing in guys out of high school, finding a way to hold on to most of those, develop them and get them ready. For the most part, that's still working. There may come a time when it's not, but for now, it's still sort of working. Joseph Kennedy says, I'm nervous about the game, but I still think we win. I'd say that's probably my overall thinking. I'm really not that nervous necessarily. I do view this to be a losable game for Georgia, but I assume that Georgia probably won't lose it, and I certainly hope they don't. But I assume I just sort of assume this is a game that Georgia, could lose. Randy Hall mentioning the Ernest Green, perhaps healthy again. Yeah, I mean, listen, you want as many healthy bodies as you can, and having 6 or 7 really capable offensive linemen more than just your starters, that's helped Georgia in the college football playoff before. Matt Rukavina predicts 27-17, Georgia shutting them down defensively. I love that prediction. I think that's great. Al Chandler says Beck got us here, and Gunner's going to finish the job with grit and determination. I like that too. That's really good stuff. UGA Marine says, I live down in Texas, and those boys down there have insanely deep pockets. That's obviously true. It's amazing it's just amazing how many of the Texas schools, even the ones like SMU and TCU and Baylor, for instance, a few years ago, Baylor built a brand new football stadium, from the ground up, something you don't see a lot of college teams doing. But they built the thing from scratch. There was just a lot of money in all these Texas schools. And you've got schools that you don't always think about having a lot of money, but right now they seem to be spending a lot of money. And that's like, say, Ole Miss, for instance, very active in the transfer portal, bringing in a lot of guys. I think one of the things that will be interesting, though, for these teams that spend big but don't get results from that spending. For instance, Ole Miss didn't make the playoff this year. They lost 3 times. So far, they appear to be very active in next year's portal, too. By that, I mean the 2025 roster, via the portal. They seem to be very active once again. But there is sort of a natural, I guess, sort of cyclical nature to the economy in that if I'm big money booster and I'm spending big but not getting the sort of results I expect, my enthusiasm about spending big in the future, eventually that may just get reduced. That it's easy to be the sort of, big money bags guy that, loves getting the pats in the bag because you help buy so-and-so player as long as the team's winning. But when you reduce your net worth by a 7-figure sum and that guy either gets hurt or doesn't contribute to your team winning a national championship, your enthusiasm about wanting to do that again might be reduced. So I think there is a natural market correction that could eventually come in NIL because the sort of unbridled arms race that exists right now, it's a little bit like, do you remember the poker craze? Going back to the early 2000s. There's this huge poker craze. Everybody's playing online poker or going to poker tournaments, things like that. Everybody's into poker. But eventually the poker craze ended. And you know why the poker craze ended? Because some people got tired of losing. And when you got tired of losing, you stopped playing. And so now the only people who are left are sort of the poker lifers. And they're just sort of passing around the same pot of money back and forth. That if there aren't new players coming into the game, if we're all sitting at the poker table together, you may win, I may win, but we're essentially just sort of passing around the same pot of money. And that's not very attractive long term. And that is the story of the poker craze. If you remember that from the early days, early 21st century, that's why it ended, because some people got tired of losing. In the NIL race, I promise you the same thing will go on. Everybody's into it right now, but if you're pumping in dollars to your favorite team and your team doesn't win, eventually you're going to get tired of losing your money. And some of these teams are just going to bow out because their boosters are just going to be too fatigued. So there is a sort of a market correction coming here at a certain point, even as more money starts to come in from like the revenue sharing and things like that. Chaz Kachmar says, no opponent has any earthly idea what this new Georgia offense is going to queue up. And this, is going to play right into Kirby Smart's strategy, a new signal caller with a month to prepare. He says, we are going to be good. So there you go. A lot of confidence kind of rolling in there on that. Brandon Griffin says, I'll be surprised if Notre Dame scores more than 10 to 13 points. So, boy, a lot of Georgia fans feeling really good here right now. Senior Dog also sharing a happy holidays message to everybody. Hope everybody's enjoying that. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas to everybody. Appreciate that. Let's see what else before we get ready to go. Oh, Let's Go Dogs pointing out today's the Birmingham Bowl. What a battle that's going to be between Vanderbilt and Georgia Tech. Listen, I'm very pro Vandy in that game. I will not be cheering for the Yellow Jackets. I can promise you that. But don't mind cheering for Vanderbilt. To me, this Vanderbilt team this year is pretty fun. I thought that was a pretty fun team. So happy to cheer for them here today. Yard Dog also pointing out that SMU raised huge sum of money. Yeah, I mean, all those Texas schools, whether they be the privates, the publics, whatever else, they all have access to a ton of money. Chaz also pointing out that defense wins championships. And for me, like that's as we said during the show, that is as important for me as the offensive side with Gunnar Stockton is, can you find a way to unlock the version of Georgia defensively that we've seen in a couple of games against Texas, but admittedly we haven't always seen against other teams, and probably not for a full game in any of those contests. So if you can get that from Georgia defensively, if this team can kind of remake itself in the image of what it was in 2021 with complementary football on both sides, a lot of defense, enough offense, and everybody sort of doing their shared version of the load, this can be a Georgia team that goes on to great things. It absolutely can. It absolutely can. Let's see what else. Brandon Griffin says he thinks that Kirby's been ahead of the game when it comes to where he commits his NIL dollars to. I think that's the case. I do. I do think that there's probably a bigger conversation to be had at some point in time about which positions should be commanding and demanding the lion's share of your NIL dollars. I don't know that we're fully there yet, but I think eventually we could be. But obviously, when it comes to the kind of team that Georgia's putting out there, the sort of roster that it's putting together, I don't think there's any substitute for what Georgia has been doing. I think that's the case. Lance D says, we'll make a couple more comments. We'll get out of here. Lance says the biggest key to stopping Notre Dame is punishing Riley Leonard when he runs. He gashed A&M with the run, and that's the closest team physically to Georgia Notre Dame has faced. Stop that, and Georgia wins. I do believe that's true. If you can eliminate quarterback run, you can do that for sure. That's also been one of the issues that Georgia's had some trouble with. We got to be honest with as well about that. Blind Squirrel checking out. Appreciate that. Let's see what else. Jerry Popham says there are several what should be pretty good games all day long. Yeah, so we're kind of in the teeth of the bowl season now, which is a good thing. I appreciate that. So looking forward to a fun day. We'll get ready to let you go here right now. All kinds of good stuff here going on. So stay close to Dog Nation. Coverage from practice today. We'll hear from Glenn Schumann. That's coming up in just a few minutes. So there is a lot to be had with that. Y'all enjoy that. Plus, check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. Continue to enjoy a great Christmas. Enjoy your bowl season. Get ready for New Orleans. Getting ready for everything else. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all Georgia fans. We will see you soon right back here on our RS Andrews Cooled and Dog Nation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then, everybody.